Imagine this scenario for a second. You spend months, maybe even years, navigating this labyrinth of government bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah, the endless forms.
Right, endless forms. You are tracking down century-old census records. You are paying thousands in legal fees. And then finally, the moment arrives.
You actually get it.
Exactly. You receive your official certificate of citizenship in the mail. It is essentially this golden ticket.
Right.
So you uproot your entire life. You pack your bags, you move across the border to a completely new country, and you start settling in. Picture yourself at a local park, maybe just enjoying the ducks and the peacocks, finally letting out a breath.
Just soaking in your new life.
Yeah. And right then, your phone buzzes.
Oh, no.
It's an email from the government. And that email says, essentially, we made a mistake. Give the certificate back.
I mean, that sounds like a literal bureaucratic anxiety dream, like the kind of scenario you wake up in a cold sweat from, where the finish line just keeps moving further away.
It really does. But for a growing number of people in Canada right now, it is not a dream. It is their waking reality.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've been digging through a mountain of legal blogs, news reports, official government statements for you today to figure out how something like this is even, legally possible.
Right, because it sounds impossible.
Totally. So today's deep dive is exploring this exact nightmare scenario unfolding for a group known as the Lost Canadians. Our mission today is to uncover why the Canadian government is abruptly suspending the citizenship of newly approved individuals.
We're going to look into the inner workings of what actually broke down in the documentation process, right?
Exactly. And we'll look at how this impacts potentially millions of people, especially Americans, who might secretly be Canadian without even knowing it.
Because this is far beyond a simple administrative mix-up.
Oh, definitely.
What we are looking at is a massive collision between historic genealogy, modern technology, and the incredibly rigid letter of the law. It's raising some pretty profound questions about human identity, the reliability of these institutions we trust, and even fundamental constitutional rights.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the sheer shock of these sudden revocation emails, we first need to understand the massive legislative change that handed out these citizenships in the first place.
Right, the law that started it all.
Yeah. I look at this new law kind of like finding a winning lottery ticket in your attic.
That's a good way to put it.
But to actually cash it in, the government is telling you that you have to prove exactly who bought that ticket 100 years ago. It's an incredible stroke of luck, but it comes with a massive logistical hurdle.
It really does. So the legislation creating that lottery ticket is known as Bill C-3, which took effect in December 2025.
Okay.
This bill completely overhauled Canada's citizenship rules by removing what was known as the first generation limit.
First generation limit. What was that, practically speaking?
So historically, that limit was put in place to prevent a scenario where multiple generations of a family could live abroad, never set foot in Canada, yet still, pass down Canadian citizenship indefinitely.
Right, that makes sense.
Under the old rules, if a Canadian citizen was born outside of Canada, they could not pass their citizenship on to their children who were also born outside of Canada.
So it stopped right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The citizenship firmly stopped at that first generation born abroad.
Which, makes sense from a purely administrative standpoint. You're keeping the citizen pool tied to the actual geography of the country.
Right.
But Bill C-3 completely upended that logic.
It really did. The new law states that anyone born before December 15, 2025, who can prove an unbroken chain of descent to a Canadian ancestor is now eligible for citizenship.
Wait, any ancestor?
Any unbroken chain. It absolutely does not matter if that ancestor is your parent, your grandparent, or your great-great-grandparent.
Wow.
If you can draw the line, you qualify.
That is a staggering expansion of the rules. We aren't just talking about a few dozen people who suddenly found a loophole here.
Not at all.
Since the law took effect, over 4,100 people have already received proof of citizenship under this new rule.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. The true scale of who is actually eligible out there in the world is mind-boggling. We are talking about millions of people, particularly sitting right now in the United States, who are secretly Canadian and have absolutely no idea.
If we zoom out and look at the broader mechanism of North American history, this makes perfect sense.
Right, the migration.
Exactly. Between 1840 and 1930, nearly 900,000 French-speaking Canadians migrated south.
Almost 1 million people.
Yeah. They left the Agrarian Society of Quebec and moved primarily to feed the booming industrial revolution happening in the U.S.
Ah, okay.
They went to the massive textile mills of New England and the upper Midwest. We are talking about places like Maine, Connecticut, Michigan, and Wisconsin.
So their descendants today, generation after generation, just consider themselves Americans.
Completely.
They've been living in Michigan or Maine for over a century. Over the decades, the trail just went entirely cold for a lot of these families.
Yeah, and a big part of that is the names.
Right. Names were anglicized to blend into American society. So if you are listening to this right now and your last name is White, King, Wood, or Carter, and you have roots in New England or the Midwest, you might actually be carrying an anglicized French-Canadian surname.
Which is fascinating.
It is. Like, Wood might have originally been Dubois. White might have been LeBlanc.
The linguistic data tracking this is just incredible. Surnames act almost like genetic fingerprints.
How so?
Well, according to demographic dispersion models, an American with the surname Oulet is 368 times more likely to have Canadian roots than a typical surname would suggest.
368 times.
Yeah. Tremblay is about 114 times more likely. Under this new law, if these folks can connect the historical dots with the right paperwork, they are already legally Canadian citizens.
That's wild.
They don't have to apply to become citizens. They just need to apply for the certificate that proves they already are.
Which brings us back to the people who did exactly that. They realized they had that winning lottery ticket, they gathered all their paperwork, they submitted it, and a government officer literally stamped it. Approved.
Yeah, they did.
But then, on June 13th, 2026, the nightmare started. Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, which we'll just call IRCC for short, sent out a wave of emails.
A massive wave.
Yeah, lawyers estimate it was at least a couple of hundred of these notices demanding that these newly minted citizens surrender their physical citizenship certificates under subsection 26(1) of the citizenship regulations.
The human toll of that single email is devastating. Take the case of Sean Davis Mooney.
Oh, this story's rough.
It is. He is a U.S. veteran. He went through the rigorous process, hired a lawyer, and submitted 114 pages of historical evidence proving his great-great-grandparent was from New Brunswick.
114 pages.
Right. And he was approved for urgent processing and received his certificate in the spring.
So put yourself in Sean's shoes for a second. Based on that government approval, he and his husband packed up their entire lives in California and moved permanently to Victoria, British Columbia.
A huge move.
Huge. He transferred his social insurance number. He paid the hefty fees to sponsor his husband. He got all his local IDs changed over. They're at a local park, literally looking at ducks and peacocks, taking a breath after this massive international move, and he gets the email. Hand the certificate back.
Just gut-wrenching.
Now, his husband's spousal work permit is completely in limbo, and Mooney says he feels, quote, like a fraud.
And we see that same psychological whiplash with Rana Sharon from Ohio.
Right.
She traced her roots back to her great-great-grandmother in Quebec using historical census data. She described getting that certificate as one of the most exciting moments of her life, a real honoring of her family's heritage.
Beautiful moment.
And then the surrender letter arrived. She called the IRCC a black box because the letter didn't even give her specific instructions on what document she was supposedly missing or what was wrong with her own 114 pages of proof.
And there's Valerie Campbell from Maine, who had already put her house up for sale to move to Canada before getting her notice.
Wow.
My immediate question when looking at all these sources is about the fundamental mechanics of government trust.
Yeah, the trust is broken.
If trained immigration officers reviewed these complex historical files, verified the 114 pages of evidence, and officially approved them, how can the government just hit undo on a finalized citizenship? Doesn't that completely destroy the trust you place in any official government document?
It does, and you are hitting on a massive bureaucratic failure here. When Bill C-3 opened the floodgates, it completely broke the system.
Too many people.
Way too many. IRCC received an enormous surge of applications, over 12,000 in just the first month and a half.
Oh my gosh.
Immigration lawyer Maureen Silkoff pointed out the glaring management issue at the heart of this. She asked, if the rigorous requirements weren't met, why were they approved in the first place?
Right.
And if the applicants did provide the necessary explanations for missing historical documents, were those explanations simply overlooked by overwhelmed staff, desperately trying to clear an impossible backlog?
Wait, so this wasn't a sudden discovery of massive fraud? This sounds like the system got flooded. The officers were likely operating under strict quota systems to clear the backlog. They rubber stamped some approvals based on the evidence provided, and then someone higher up hit the panic button.
Exactly.
They realized the standard wasn't applied evenly and said, pull them all back, we need to check the math.
That is essentially the mechanism of the chaos we are seeing. The government's justification for pulling them back comes down to a very fierce, almost philosophical debate over what actually constitutes historical proof.
What do they mean by that?
Well, IRCC's official stance is that these flagged applicants allegedly didn't provide documents from original source authorities.
Wait, original source authorities? You mean they expect someone to produce a pristine, official government birth certificate from the 1850s?
Yes.
A time when most births were just written down by a priest in a local parish book.
That is the core of the friction right there. Modern civil registries simply did not exist in the same way back then.
Obviously not.
But IRCC standard dictates that if an applicant couldn't get a government birth certificate from 1850, they failed to provide a formal letter of no record from the modern government, proving they tried and failed to get it, along with a detailed written explanation of the gap.
So with people's lives completely upended by this, the government obviously had to respond. And their defense, coming straight from Immigration Minister Lina Diab in Parliament, hinges on a very rigid definition of proof.
Right, what did she say?
She stated, quote, genealogy websites are not enough. She insists that applicants must link their ancestry, generation per generation, through verified, authenticated documents directly from the source.
Which is where the entire process short circuits. Because many of these applicants use platforms like Ancestry.com or Family Search to find the very census records and baptismal records needed to bridge the gaps where formal birth certificates didn't exist.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Genealogist Kendra Baide and immigration lawyer Cedric Marin immediately pointed out a massive, almost comical contradiction in the government's defense.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is. Government archives in provinces like Quebec and Ontario actually direct their own citizens to partnered websites like Ancestry.ca to view these historical records.
Unbelievable.
But physical archives are too fragile for public handling, or the government simply lacks the funding to digitize millions of brittle parish ledgers themselves, so they partner with private tech companies to do it.
Right.
If the government's own archives are outsourcing their databases to Ancestry, isn't it entirely absurd to punish applicant for using the exact digital tool the government recommends?
It is a striking paradox. Cedric Marin noted that a lot of these archives have literally handed their full collections over to Ancestry to make them publicly accessible.
Wow.
But Kendra Baide, the genealogist, clarified the mechanical nuance that the government is getting hung up on. Ancestry itself isn't the problem. It's a hosting tool.
Okay, so what's the issue?
The issue is that the government requires applicants to explicitly cite the original physical source of the document, like the provincial archive, rather than just submitting a printout that has the Ancestry logo on it.
I see.
A family tree generated by a website's algorithm is obviously not legal proof. But the scanned high-resolution image of a census ledger from 1880 hosted on the website is the actual evidence. It just needs to be sourced correctly in the paperwork.
But the communication around this from IRCC has been completely opaque. Clearly, everyday applicants didn't understand that highly technical archival nuance.
How could they?
Right. And it seems like IRCC is making up the rules as they go to cover their tracks. Because right after this public uproar happened, the government quietly went in and updated its online document guide.
They absolutely did. They modified the official checklist to explicitly state that certified baptismal records can be used in lieu of birth certificates for ancestors born before modern records existed.
Wow, so they knew.
Yeah. Previously, the guidance was incredibly vague. This quiet, retroactive update suggests that the government fully realizes its own initial instructions were nowhere near clear enough for the complexity of tracing lineage back to the 19th century.
So let's look at the reality of this. We have people who acted in completely good faith, followed the rules exactly as they understood them, provided mountains of evidence, got officially approved by a trained government officer, uprooted their lives, and are now having their existence turned upside down entirely because the government realized its own internal checklist wasn't rigorous enough.
And that profound bureaucratic chaos is now morphing into a very serious legal battle. The inconsistencies in how these surrender letters were issued are baffling to immigration lawyers.
What kind of inconsistencies?
Well, for example, lawyer Sarah Pesco noted a truly bizarre situation in her practice. She has seen cases where an entire family applied together using the exact same family tree, the exact same historical documents, and the exact same anchor relative.
Okay.
And yet the parents received surrender letters demanding their certificates back, while their children did not.
Hold on, using the exact same anchor relative.
The exact same one.
That means this isn't a legal standard being applied at all. It is literally just a luck of the draw on which overwhelmed officer happened to review your specific file that day.
Exactly. It points to a complete lack of standardization in how the files were reviewed during that initial 12,000 application search. Different officers applied entirely different interpretations of the historical evidence.
What a mess.
It is. But beyond the immediate administrative mess of who gets a letter and who doesn't, there is a looming constitutional threat here that could fundamentally change Canadian law.
Let's dive into that legal mechanism. Because asking someone to mail back their citizenship certificate isn't just an inconvenience, it is stripping them of their legal foundation.
Exactly. Lawyer Alo Gujak points out that subsection 26 of 1 of the Citizenship regulations, the specific rule allowing the government to demand the certificate back if they merely have reason to believe the person isn't entitled to it, might actually violate Section 15.1 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
And Section 15.1 is the equality rights section, guaranteeing freedom from discrimination based on things like national origin.
Exactly how Bujak frames the argument. Subsection 26.1 requires a very low bar. The government doesn't need to prove you committed fraud. They just need a reason to believe a mistake was made on their end. But here is the constitutional trap. A Canadian-born citizen proves their citizenship with a provincial birth certificate. The federal government cannot force you to surrender your provincial birth certificate under this federal regulation.
Okay, I follow.
But a citizen by descent, born in Ohio or California, relies entirely on this federal citizenship certificate. By unilaterally taking it away with an email, the government effectively suspends their ability to exercise their rights, like getting a passport or proving they can work in a way they could never legally do to someone born in Toronto or Vancouver.
So if I'm born in Toronto, my proof is provincial and the federal government can't touch it.
Right.
But if I'm born abroad, my proof is federal, meaning they can snatch it back with a simple email without a formal hearing. That is the literal definition of a two-tiered citizenship system.
That is the exact mechanism constitutional lawyers are preparing to challenge in court. And it has escalated so quickly that it has caught the attention of politicians across the entire spectrum. Conservative Member of Parliament Michelle Rempel-Garner has been aggressively pressing the immigration minister in Parliament, demanding exact numbers on how many people actually receive citizenship using allegedly inaccurate documents versus how many are just victims of bad processing.
And on the other side of the aisle, NDP immigration critic Jenny Kwan has issued a stark warning that applicants are already contemplating class action lawsuits.
Yeah.
She pointed out that these people acted in complete good faith, followed the complex rules they were given, and are now paying a massive financial and emotional price for the government's internal processing breakdowns. And just to be clear for you listening, we are not endorsing the viewpoints of any of these politicians here.
Right. Definitely not taking sides.
We are simply looking at how impartially massive this problem has become in the House of Commons based on the sources. Both sides of the aisle recognize that the integrity of the citizenship process is currently failing.
Totally. To synthesize the core of what we've unpacked today, Bill C-3, the Lost Canadians Law, was genuinely meant to right a historical wrong. It opened the door to citizenship for potentially millions of people who had been unfairly cut off by the first-generation limit. But the reality of actually proving a century-old lineage has proven to be a bureaucratic minefield.
A total minefield.
The government standard of proof currently requires an unbroken, perfectly documented chain of custody for historical records that, in many cases, barely survived the 19th century.
And when those fragile records aren't perfectly aligned with modern bureaucratic standards, the government's fallback is demanding a formal letter proving the record doesn't exist, which just adds a whole other impossible layer of bureaucracy to the mix.
Exactly. Now, it is important to remind anyone listening who might actually be caught up in this exact situation. IRCC's official stance is that this is currently a review, not a formal revocation of citizenship.
That's a key distinction.
Legally, these individuals are still considered Canadian citizens while the review is happening. If they're already inside Canada, like Sean Mooney, they can still legally work. They just cannot get or use a Canadian passport. And the government maintains that if applicants eventually provide the requested source documents or the proper letters of explanation, they will get their certificates back.
It is a review that feels indistinguishable from a punishment, though. Think back to Sean Mooney feeding the ducks in Victoria.
Yeah.
He gave up his life in California based on a formalized promise from the Canadian government. Even if he somehow sources the perfect archival document and gets the certificate back in 6 months, the fundamental trust is broken.
Completely broken.
Rana Sharan said she is terrified that even if she satisfies the bureaucracy now, what is to stop the government from knocking on her door 10 years from now when she has put down deep roots, claiming they found another clerical error?
The psychological toll of that uncertainty is undeniable. Citizenship is the ultimate foundation of a person's legal and physical security in the world.
Yes, exactly.
When that foundation is shaken retroactively, not because of something you did wrong, but because of a government filing standard changing overnight, it creates a very deep, lingering anxiety.
It really is a profound vulnerability. And looking at all these century-old census records and fragile baptismal books leaves me with one final thought for you to chew on today.
What's that?
We are talking about people tracing their roots back to the 1840s, relying entirely on physical paper. Baptismal records written in fading ink, census ledgers stored in unair-conditioned provincial archives for decades. But physical paper degrades.
It does.
It burns in massive library fires, it gets destroyed in floods, it simply turns to dust over time. If our entire legal identity, our fundamental right to citizenship and heritage, relies on perfectly preserved physical paper from 150 years ago, what happens over the next 100 years?
That is a staggering realization when you look at the timeline of human history versus the lifespan of paper.
As those physical archives inevitably decay and crumble, will future generations be entirely locked out of their own heritage simply because a piece of paper didn't survive 3 centuries of wear and tear? Or will governments eventually be forced to completely redefine what proof actually means in a digital, increasingly paperless world? Because if a sudden email in a park can undo your entire life today over a missing piece of 19th century parchment, how fragile will our identities be tomorrow?